Since the Treaty of Verdun in 843, there was no single dominant emperor in Europe. This is going to change, though, when a regional ruler, Otto the Great, inherited a strong position from his father. Otto the Great is going to become king in 936, and he did not treat his feudal lords or dukes as rulers like previous kings. Instead, he treated them as subordinates in a hierarchical chain of a unified kingdom. So as part of his government organization, he liked to use the church, specifically high-ranking bishops or prestigious monasteries in his larger cities. King Otto used them because the people listened to bishops and monks as they had great authority. In turn, church officials liked the idea of a single empire. Otto the Great also liked to have clergy in his government because they would not create a competitive family that would try to dethrone him from his position. Otto the Great made the clergy royal administrators, acting as government agents to the king. And in 962, Otto is going to be crowned Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and he quickly tried to assume full control of the church, causing a confrontation between him and the Pope. And one of the things that he is doing is this idea called lay investiture, and that is when someone who is not a member of the clergy and not a member of the church power appoints a religious official. So this would be Otto appointing bishops or other religious officials without really having the power within the church to do so. So as the confrontation between the Pope and Otto the Great escalated, there was a monastery in Cluny, France, that was tired of the arguments between the two. They believed the church was an open organization where, in theory, any believer could become the Pope. The monks at Cluny were strict followers of the Benedictine order, and they were determined to maintain a church that was spiritually focused. So they are going to reject the idea that any member of the church clergy, from the parish priest to the Pope, should be following what an emperor tells them to do. They claim the Pope was the sole ruler and controller over church offices and not an emperor like Otto. So the Cluny reforms helped one of the strong emperors of the High Middle Ages. And Pope Gregory the Seventh was a strong advocate of church reforms, and he was willing to put the belief in the separation of church and state to the test. So in the year 1075, Pope Gregory the Seventh said that anyone who practiced the policy of lay investiture, so anyone who was appointing church officials as a government official, would be excommunicated from the church. So excommunication is when you are kicked out of the church. An excommunicated person could not go to church, could not receive the sacraments, and it was believed at the time that an excommunicated person couldn't get into heaven. So Pope Gregory VII declared that to be acknowledged as a high-ranking clergyman, a person would need to receive a ring and a staff from the Pope with the church markings on them. The Pope made this ruling, and it would make it so that it was no longer possible for an emperor to give religious authority to a person. And this was a shock to royal authority, as many emperors had used lay investiture intentionally to make the church and religion part of their government. And the emperor at the time, Henry IV, considered Pope Gregory's ruling as an intentional challenge to his authority. So in 1077, Emperor Henry IV had to stand outside the Pope's retreat in Italy wearing official presence garb for 3 days before the Pope would forgive him. The Pope emerged victorious, and the power of the church was deemed as supreme over political authority, and the separation of church and state is going to remain. Now, meanwhile, in the same region, the area that we know today as Germany was trying to maintain their independence from the Holy Roman Emperor. There were 360 states or little kingdoms inside Germany, and they were watching this confrontation between the Pope and Emperor Henry IV very closely because they were hoping that the church would win. If the emperor was too busy focusing his attention on the Pope, then this would allow their tiny kingdoms to retain some independence. All this is going to come to a head in 1122 when the controversy over lay investiture is going to be settled at a meeting that's called the Concordat of Worms. The new emperor of the Holy Roman Empire at the time was Henry V, and he's going to formally renounce the power to create bishops. In exchange, the Pope said the emperor could give grants of land or fiefs to a new bishop, but the church had to give that title to that individual. So only the church had the authority to give a title to a bishop. This is going to show that the church was more powerful than the emperor, as they had the final authority over naming of a bishop.